Welcome, comrades. NEC Miller officially opened the National Executive Committee, NEC, MidWinter Conference here in Richmond, Virginia. NEC Miller serves from the District of Columbia as your primary NEC representative for District 6 from 2024 through 2026. Comrade Jorge Cruz from Puerto Rico is alternate NEC, serving from 2024 to 2026. Captain John Maxwell, U.S. Navy retired, served as our final speaker to conclude our morning session for the MidWinter Conference.
In economics and holding a master's business administration degree from Auburn University. Comrades, please join me in welcoming John Maxwell.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for having me here today. And it's a real privilege to speak with you for a few minutes here. And I thought that Director Johnson's remarks were really important, and there's some themes in what he said that you'll hear me talk a little bit about today. Before we get started, I heard all this hooah for Army, but today's the big day, so go Navy!
Go Navy!
Just thought I'd try to warm us up here a little bit. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about community. And you heard that as part of the bio, the chair of the Veteran Community Network of Central Virginia, a really long term, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But the reason I want to spend time talking about community is I think that it is overlooked. I think there's tremendous power in our communities, and quite candidly, the rubber meets the road in our communities. And so, because this is where the action happens, this is where we get things done, I want to talk about how our veteran community, how it integrates with our larger community, and some things that I think that can be done in some ways that we can improve. The other part of this is that we know that for veterans and their spouses to some degree, it is hard to become part of the community. You might have kids in soccer games, but to truly become a member of the civilian community is not an easy task. And part of this is because when you're in the military, you have these super intense experiences. You're told at boot camp that your community is your squad or your platoon or the person who's in the same room with you, and you have to work together. And you learn that on not the first day, but in about the first 2 minutes. And you have to carry that throughout your entire military career. And you learn to trust. But as a civilian, that trust is not assumed. It's not necessarily there. And quite candidly, as a veteran, you don't get that. You don't understand that until you're really deep into it. And that tries to cause some problems. We know that our communities, they're not bad. Our communities are great. But how do we get to a place where our communities warmly and completely integrate with veterans so that both veterans and the community do well, and really so that everybody thrives? I think, and this is what I'm going to talk about today, I think that this is our job as veterans, as veteran services organizations, to be able to try to make this happen. So let me provide a little bit of context here, because I think that it's important. I've been a veteran for 5 years. I will tell you that when I was a veteran for 5 minutes, I didn't know anything about being a veteran. And I think that that's an important piece to remember for veterans, especially when you are new in your veteran journey. And being a veteran, we know, is a journey. From minute one until the day that you are no longer on this earth, that is always a journey. I certainly had great pride in being a veteran, had great sense of opportunity, but I also felt some loss. And I really didn't expect that loss to be as strong as it was. So And for some, I know that that's difficult. For some, they're happy that when that door shuts, they're great. I want to get past that. But for me, that was a bit of a sense of loss. The TAP program, and I know the Department of Defense is trying, but the TAP program, it really focused on two things. It said, this is how you get a job. And then it said, file your disability claim. By the way, thank you to the Disabled American Veterans, because that's who did my disability claim. I was the chief of staff. Yeah, exactly. I was super busy and going through TAP. I hadn't made any appointments, and I wish I remembered her name, but the DAV services representative said, give me your record. And she said, come back in 3 days. And she said, hey, here's what I found in your record and what I think you should file for. I signed on the bottom line, and there you go. And if it hadn't been for her, I don't know where I would be with my disability claim. I don't know that I would have taken care of it right away. But just absolutely superb customer support there. Budgeting. My budgeting was a check in the block, right? I did it like I handed my budget to the TAP counselor on the day I wanted her to sign off. That didn't do me any good because there are some decisions I made that I wish I'd have spent some time on budget. But nobody told me that. Nobody emphasized that really take a hard look at your budget and what that can do for you. And then lastly, the piece where I thought that the TAP program fell short was there was no discussion about purpose. What will be your purpose as a veteran? I can tell you this, and I suspect that many, if not all of you, agree with me. Your purpose as a veteran is not to be employed. Employment might be a pathway to that, but your purpose as a veteran is not to get a job. And I think that as we talk more here this morning, you'll see why I really feel that way. The last thing that was really interesting was that they said, focus on what industry do you want to be in. And I said, well, I want to go into maritime logistics, but I didn't really know what that was. The closest I got to maritime logistics was I was working for a trucking and rail firm in Portsmouth, Virginia, that was on the water. I never got any closer to maritime logistics than that. So you can see how that got me. So I days as commissioner. This is important from a context perspective. I was the COVID commissioner, and I'm still affectionately referred to as the COVID commissioner. Yeah. Literally 2 weeks after I showed up, Governor Northam shut the place down. Everybody was getting sick. And so we had to figure out how to do this. So my year, really a year, was spent on figuring that out and how to do this telework and then hybrid piece. And that was a great learning experience for me. But I learned how to administer to veterans. Because being a veteran and administering to veterans are not the same thing. And the other thing that I found was really interesting, and I think you probably see this, and I guarantee you Director Johnson knows this, is that you don't have to be a veteran to do good things for veterans. There's a lot of folks who are not veterans, and the passion for what they're doing is amazing. Quite in some instances, better than any veteran would do for a fellow veteran. The other piece that I kind of discovered is I learned about what the state was doing, and I thought that the state had to do everything for veterans. Now remember, I wasn't getting out and talking to you or the VFW or the American Legion Post or other community partners at the time. But I thought the state had to do everything. And I think that that's a problem, because the state shouldn't do everything. I'm a big fan that the state should empower our local communities. Fortunately, as I was ending my tour there, I did get a good glimpse into what communities can do for veterans. I could see what companies would do. You could see a post or a neighborhood or an employee resource group. And so I got an idea what that was there, but what I didn't see the synergies. I didn't see the connections. The VA has also seen this, and what do they know? They know that when communities surround their veterans, they see that veterans do better. So if you pull all of these things together, you get to this concept of a community veteran engagement board, which is what I'm the chair of right now. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. because I think it's important to set the stage as to how that model can work and how we can work together on that. Now, there's a couple of nonprofits, so from a transparency perspective, you'll hear me talking about them. I'm not trying to promote them, but it just becomes the model that we're using. And I've been working the nonprofit side now for about 3 years, since I left the Department of Veteran Services. So I've learned a lot along the way. And I may say some things that you may not agree with. That's okay. I'm not asking to change your mind. What I am looking to do is just get you to think, and we can hold a great conversation. Okay, so we want to solve these problems for veterans. You wouldn't be sitting in your seats today listening to me or listening to Director Johnson and the other speakers if you weren't here to solve problems for veterans. But the concept I want us to think about here is the parable of Jesus and the 100 sheep, right? What does this parable say? 99 sheep are doing fine, one goes off, and Jesus spends an awful lot of time trying to find that one sheep. Isn't that something that we did in the military? Wasn't that our ethos in the military? Right? So my question, and I'm probably posing it to the wrong audience here, but I think it's a question to ask the rest of our fellow veterans. Why doesn't that ethos carry through as a veteran? I'm not really sure. Is it because society is getting too hard? Is it that we see too many bad examples of that, where we just let people disappear and we don't do anything about it? Is it that we're no longer believing in the right thing to do the right thing is just the right thing to do? I'm not really sure, but I think that's something that we have to strongly consider. And I think there's some other trends that we're fighting that we really have to worry about. Number one, there are less veterans out here today, and there will continue to be less veterans. That's just the fact of the numbers. There are family connections, and as I mentioned before, Director Johnson mentioned, these family connections are huge, and that really matters. But as those family connections get farther and farther away from the veteran, that's just going to get diluted, and we've got to worry about that. We know that it is difficult to recruit volunteers. We see some veterans not supporting other veterans. We see burnout amongst all of you, right? You're working your tails off and you're wanting other folks to try to help you out, and you're not seeing that. And then this concept of social isolation. Look at our society today. We are highly interconnected, yet our social isolation is going through the roof. The Surgeon General says we have an epidemic of social isolation. Okay, so that's kind of a problem here. Have any of you read the book Tribe or listened to the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger? I strongly recommend it. Sebastian Junger is he has written a couple of different books. He was a war correspondent, has spent a lot of time on the ground in combat, actually suffered from PTSD. And he spent some time talking in this book about community. And he goes back and interviews, he starts the book where he's discussing American Indian tribes. And I use the term American Indian because Sebastian Junger uses that himself. And when he was interviewing an Apache, member of the Apache tribe, and used Native American, the member of the Apache tribe said, please don't use that. I'd rather, because anybody who was born in the US can be a Native American. But American Indians, this describes us properly. So that's why I use that term American Indian. But what he's found was that these generally egalitarian societies were very well connected. And admittedly, if someone broke their trust or used too many resources, they were forced out. And it was pretty ugly in the ways that they were forced out. But on the other hand, white settlers, as America was growing, they wanted to go be parts of these American Indian tribes. You didn't see it going the other way, but you saw white settlers that wanted to be part of these tribes. And so there was something there. And from his research, what he discovered is it was all about how they take care of each other and how they create their communities. They discovered that they had very low rates, if no rates, of suicide caused by depression. They might, a member of a tribe might commit suicide if they felt like they were taking too many resources because of their ailments, but from a depression perspective, wasn't there. So this concept of community, which existed there, and what you're seeing now, something has happened in between. And the other thing that we're missing here is that human beings are wired to help others. But again, why are we not helping others in the way that happened a long time ago? He also discussed in another study in 2015. There was a study of George Washington University lawyers, about 6,000 of them, and they found zero, and I mean zero correlation between success as a lawyer, highly billable hours, for example, and happiness. They found public defenders who got paid a lot less to be much happier than these lawyers who had high billable hours. So this isolation, this focus on the stuff, this focus on how you look, that's not getting us where we have to go as a society. The next thing that I want to try to make a connection here with you is, and I'm going to use a little bit of science. I promise there's no math involved, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but it's called social or self-determination theory. Really means three things. For you to be at your best, you want autonomy, i.e., I want to do what I want to do, kind of like your teenager, right? I want to do what I want to do. Competence, so I want to be really, really good at what I'm doing, and relatedness. And that means that I feel belonging amongst others. In the military, you have that. Right now, you go to boot camp, you get taught how to behave, but then once you're trained, you're off on your own, and you're expected to make decisions in these highly intense scenarios. So you have the competence, you'll get the autonomy, but when you were in the military, when did you ever do anything alone? You didn't sleep alone. You didn't do your work alone. You certainly didn't experience combat alone. There was probably only 1 or 2 times a day that you were alone. But otherwise, you were always with somebody, and you were just with somebody. You were expected to do your job with somebody, to work as a team. But in the civilian world, that seems to be different. There is some element of autonomy that in the civilian world, a lot of autonomy. There is some element of competence. If you're a veteran trying to get a job, if you don't have those skills, we know that can be difficult. But that relatedness is not existing, and that's where we're continuing to struggle here. In the civilian world, entrepreneurship, right? So go it alone. Individual sales goals. Working remotely. For some reason, we love working remotely these days. I mean, it's convenient, but we're missing out on those human connections. So this social isolation is tolerated. And I think that's part of where we're learning as veterans, where it's okay for the social isolation to exist. And I think that's something that we have to continue to work away from. Now, there's another problem that we're having, and that's this undervaluing of the military experience. We know that the military has to be ready to fight our nation's wars. Russia, China, and Iran, they're not going away. They're not going anywhere fast. You know, when Syria, when the rebels in Syria took over, did you know that we went and struck 75 ISIS targets that same night? Why did we do that? Because we wanted to tell ISIS, hey, just because there's a vacuum in power there in Syria, don't expect that you're going to rise up and take over. But that's this ability to be ready to fight our nation's wars. Did the rest of the population know that? Probably not, right? But this is what we're expecting our military members to do. But we're undervaluing that. They're always in harm's way. but we don't see that. There's no images from war. And what are we discussing today in the military? We're talking about culture issues in the military, and we're not talking about war fighting. And we're not talking about what our service members are doing. That's partly our job as veterans, right? Our job as veterans in that community is to talk about what our service members are doing. Military's getting other bad press: suicide, sexual assault, big defense budget. We've got programs over cost. As Director Johnson was talking, he's got a big budget in the VA, and that's always a political football. So there's a lot of not great press. So again, who's going to be the ones that are going to stand up for veterans in the community? Who's going to stand up for the military in the community? And I think that has to be us. I mean, it's even gotten to veterans not recommending that their own children would go in the service, which was interesting. He was talking about Michael Rodriguez there, and his dad saying that he didn't really want you to go in. There's a lot of veterans that are not recommending their kids for service. So this social isolation piece is becoming more difficult. There are partners that want to help, but there's got to be somebody to bridge this gap. All right, so us as veterans, we have a chance to grow, we have a chance to get better, and we have a chance to show the communities many of the same techniques that helped us to be successful. Our work ethic, how to show up on time, how to adapt, how to build relationships. And then we can also help teach our veterans right now how it takes time to get and build into the community. We should be the ones that fellow veterans can rely upon. And if we're not, I think we have to look at ourselves. A veteran ought to be able to come to us for some form of support and us be able to connect them. We may not have the answers, but we ought to be able to help them. But there's no corner on the market in helping veterans, right? Disabled American veterans, you have a niche in Veteran Support Network. VFW has a niche. American Legion has a niche. MOA, Veteran Community Network of Central Virginia, has a niche. Everybody's got their niche. But we've got to find a way to work together to reach other veterans and meet them where they are. We can help to solve some of that social isolation. We can help by listening and guiding and mentoring. The C stories are great. I totally get that. But then what do we do to mentor a veteran? Especially a new one. How do we do that? I think that we have an obligation to do that, is what it amounts to. Our VSOs have this immense potential to draw people to them. And the question becomes, how do we draw people into our veteran services organizations? Is what we're doing today attracting others? Maybe, maybe not. And if it's not, what are the things that we have to do to try to attract other veterans towards our veteran services organizations? My experience so far has been veterans and their families are so diverse and so widespread, and there's so much information that getting to them is way harder than it used to be. And yes?
I want you to finish first.
What's that?
I wanted you to finish first.
Okay. And so this becomes a real challenge in why an organization like the Veteran Community Network of Central Virginia exists. What we're trying to do is we are trying to make connections amongst partners. And we do this by developing and working with other organizations, businesses, veteran services organizations, nonprofits, mental health providers, the VA. We've got great partners that are involved with us in the VA. And it's a model of connecting, of not being focused on the direct services, but being focused on the community so that the partners know how to reach veterans and what to do with veterans when they reach them. It's not to take away anything from the direct services that are provided, not to take anything away from benefits counseling or financial assistance, but it's simply to find ways to connect those who have resources with those who need those resources. The other thing that it does is we pull people together to try to solve some really difficult challenges in several areas. Transition, behavioral health, justice-involved veterans, housing, and end of life. DAV Chapter 50 is a great partner, and I saw that DAV Chapter 17 in Richmond. I'd love to talk to you too, because I think you'd be a great partner. We're locally focused on the kind of the Richmond down into Tri-Cities area. That's, for those that are not from Virginia, that's in the Petersburg, Colonial Heights, about 20-25 miles south of the city. We also work with the American Legion of VFW. And we're there to focus on the outreach, to try to break down stovepipes, to try to connect all of these cylinders of excellence so that we can collaborate and fill in those gaps, to jointly resolve the gaps and to build bridges. Couple of successes that we've had, and this model does work, and we're trying to get better at it. We've had some referrals where, and this actually just happened the other day, where a veteran had multiple different challenges, was getting connected with some housing, and now we're trying to help that veteran get connected with employment. We've had justice-involved veterans who got out of jail, and then helping them to get connected with employment. We're working through a behavioral health workshop where we are collaborating with faith-based organizations, mental health providers, first responders, law enforcement, to figure out how to make the care network for veterans who are in a behavioral health crisis better, all the way from first contact to care transition. We've had a couple of end-of-life seminars to help folks understand benefits. So you can see, all we're trying to do is make these connections so that all of us can work together to reach more. If you ask the Department of Veteran Services, they'll tell you they reach about a third of the veterans and their families in the Commonwealth. It's about 1 million veterans and family members, and they're hitting about a third of them. When I was commissioner, we said it was about 150 out of the 700,000 veterans of NEC. So that means there's another 2/3 that we're not reaching. And this is where we can work together to do this. So what I hope that we can have conversations about is, why is it that we're not seeing our fellow veterans help out other veterans? That service doesn't have a shelf life. It doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It continues. It's still our job. Director Johnson said it perfectly, right? Don't just do your best, but we can do more. Burnout's an issue, but everybody can do a little bit more. I think that we all can make a difference, every single one of us, every single day. And I'll leave you with this last point, and of course, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. When you do humanitarian relief, and I know some of you have done humanitarian relief in your military time, and maybe even as a veteran, you have all of these organizations that show up that are trying to support the relief of suffering and to help people. But usually there's no one organization that's in charge. But everybody is working together to one goal. It's to get food, water, shelter for those who are in need. It is to help those who are injured, and everybody collects and is easily focused. I think that as veterans and as a veteran community, we can do exactly the same thing. We can have that unity of effort in supporting veterans and in helping them to thrive, and then to give back to other veterans as they leave the service. So thank you very much, and I'd be more than happy to take questions. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I didn't have a question. I had more just want to touch on some of the things that you were speaking on. For one, social isolation. I know you asked the group a question as to why that is a thing. I was thinking more so like why you were saying about COVID. So I joined the military around when COVID first happened, and I think that's when social isolation became more of a thing because people had to telework and people had to do certain things. And that's when people started to make their own businesses as well. A lot of people went into business for themselves. And I think a big part of that, you said why in the civilian world is it more separated? I think a big problem with that is because in the civilian world, there are jobs, and yeah, some people will quit a job very easily or won't show up to work, like you were saying. Those are initial problems that most businesses have with jobs, but they don't give people incentives to stay at jobs, and they also will fire somebody very quickly without actually asking them about their life situation or their health situation or family situation in general, which makes people want to self-isolate. It makes people want to decide to go into business for themselves, because if I'm working for you and I'm coming to you every day and I'm doing these tasks, but like how everybody got an award for saying, like, just to say thank you to people. A lot of jobs in the civilian sector don't have that. They don't have these office meetings where they celebrate people and they give people incentives to want to work there. Because when you do give people incentives, they want to do more for you. That's been a big thing that everyone's been touching on and saying, but I think that's a big part of it. Like COVID became a thing and people weren't able to socialize. And as far as my generation, I think that the people that I've met in the military, every time I've gotten a reaction from like why they're in or why they decided to get out, is more so on leadership. Because there's an affected problem like in leadership with not all leaders, but there not being a part of communication where they feel like they can actually go to their leaders and talk to them about what they feel is wrong. Because the people that are ahead of them are saying, hey, don't talk to them. Hey, don't walk up to them. There's just certain things that you're not supposed to necessarily do in the military, which creates the distance, which makes people not want to communicate, which makes it easier to build more problems when you could just communicate more effectively. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that feedback. I think what you just described really puts more burden on us as veterans to try to bridge that gap and to help to reduce that social isolation. You know, we might be working from home more, we might be entrepreneurs, but even in our entrepreneur network, you want to create these organizations or the ability for veteran entrepreneurs to be part of another group of veteran entrepreneurs, right? I mean, this is super important. You want them to have to feel like they're part of something, that there's other people that are going through this. So thanks a lot for that feedback. I appreciate it. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned your CVEB is centrally located here in like Richmond and Petersburg area. Are there other CVEBs in Virginia?
Yeah, there are. Thank you. So there are 7 other community veteran engagement boards in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They are in Farmville. There's one up in Loudoun County. There's one up near Harrisonburg, Lynchburg, and Roanoke. And then Hampton had one. I think it's a bit defunct, with Hampton VA Medical Center had going through some pretty significant challenges over the past 6 months. I think that one has kind of taken a back seat to some of the bigger issues. And there's a couple more of these community veteran engagement boards that are standing up. The Community Veteran Engagement Board is a model that the VA started, and VA doesn't provide any support. There's no money in it for sure, but they do provide this thing called a community playbook, which tells you notionally how to build one. But I can tell you, it is all about just building a community and pulling other folks together. Yes, sir.
What about in other states?
It is a national program. So other states that have community veteran engagement boards, if you Google community veteran engagement board, it should come up. Don't go to the VA website. and in their search bar, don't type in Community Veteran Engagement Board, you'll never find it. But if you Google Community Veteran Engagement Board, it'll list all the CVEBs that are in the nation. North Carolina has some really strong programs, and we are actually going to meet with them and their CVEP out in Charlotte in March for a big summit.
NEC Nachi Miller presents a token of thanks to John Maxwell for his presentation at the 2024 Midwinter Conference.